Comments on the agenda. There being none, it is adopted. Excellencies, distinguished Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to first thank all members of the Group of 77 and China for their trust and cooperation with Pakistan as the group's chair during the current year. These are challenging times for developing countries. We have suffered disproportionately from a series of shocks: the COVID-19 pandemic, rising commodity prices, the proliferation of conflicts, and the growing impacts of climate change. Our challenges have been exacerbated by a deficit in solidarity from our developed country partners. As a consequence, we now face the triple interlocking crisis of food, fuel, and finance. To overcome these cascading crises, restore our economies, and achieve the SDGs, we need to secure implementation of a series of emergency measures and simultaneously promote structural changes in the unequal and unjust international economic system. The emergency actions must encompass the following. 1. Mobilize urgent humanitarian, economic, and financial support to the more than 50 developing countries which are in economic distress. This implies larger ODA and concessional finance. We welcome the proposal of the Secretary General for an SDG stimulus of $500 billion to enable those countries which are in extreme economic distress to revive their economies and development objectives. 2. Provide emergency food supplies to the World Food Programme to the 250 million people in food distress. Further moderate prices by enlarging food production and supplies, and support small farmers' access to seed, fertilizer, and finance. 3. Ensure the availability of energy, especially gas, for developing countries and explore mechanisms to reduce the financial burden of energy imports. 4. Mobilize the universal availability of COVID vaccines and treatments. Expand vaccine production, including through intellectual property waivers, in order to end the COVID pandemic decisively. 5. Provide urgent and adequate assistance to countries suffering from the impacts of climate change. As you know, Pakistan has literally been engulfed by massive flooding caused by global warming. Pakistan emits less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it is now the epicenter of the impacts of climate change. 1/3 of the country, an area the size of the United Kingdom, is underwater. More than 1,000 people were killed and thousands more injured. 33 million people have been affected and 6 million absolutely destitute. Over 1 million homes, 7,000 kilometers of roads, 350 bridges, 5 million acres of crops have been destroyed. The total damage is estimated at over $20 billion, almost 7% of Pakistan's GDP. The entire Pakistani nation, government, armed forces, and common people have rallied to provide relief to their compatriots in need. And we are grateful to our friends, including members of the Group of 77 in China, for their generous support that they have provided Pakistan in our relief efforts. We are confident that their support will be sustained as Pakistan moves to the daunting task of rehabilitation and reconstruction. And we are incredibly grateful for the Secretary General of the United Nations for arriving in Pakistan at a time of distress, witnessing firsthand the apocalyptic devastations caused by these monster monsoons, and becoming Pakistan's champion, becoming the developing world's champion for the impacts of climate change, and for his leadership on this issue. Excellencies, beyond the emergency actions I have outlined, we need to promote global structures and policies which can end inequality and inequity among and within nations, and enable all developing countries to achieve the SDGs and the goals of the Paris Agreement. The systemic and structural reforms should be encompassed by the following. First, it is essential to reform international finance. The United Nations Secretary General has rightly called the present international financial architecture morally bankrupt. It must be aligned with the SDGs. This implies sustainable management of sovereign debt, larger concessional financing from MDBs, including through recapitalization and lowering provisioning ratios. Issuance of additional SDRs, reducing borrowing costs for developing countries, and innovative financing. Second, if we are to ensure timely transition to a sustainable and dynamic global economy, we need to mobilize $1 trillion annually as investment in sustainable infrastructure, energy, transport, housing, industry, agriculture. Besides access to public and private finance, the developing countries must prepare a pipeline of bankable projects, especially by de-risking investments through blended financing guarantees and SDG/green bonds. We should also consider setting up a UN policy board and utilize the UN country offices to promote sustainable infrastructure investment. Third, we must fully and faithfully implement the climate change agenda in accordance with the principles of common but differentiated responsibility. By COP27, we must secure fulfillment of the pledge by the industrialized countries to provide $100 billion plus annually in climate finance, allocate half of this to climate adaptation, and establish a financing facility to compensate developing countries for loss and damage from climate impacts. Meanwhile, the developed countries must assume the burden of mitigation to reach net zero emissions well before 2050. Fourth, the international trade system should be restructured to contribute to the achievement of SDGs through export-led growth in developing countries. To this end, preferential trade access for developing countries should be enlarged. They should be offered policy space for industrialization, e.g. through waivers from the TRIPS and TRIMS agreements, and unilateral trade protection and restrictions incompatible with the WTO agreements should be speedily eliminated. Fifth, the induction of a fair international tax regime, including digital trade, is essential to enable developing countries to mobilize larger domestic resources for development. Sixth, we should negotiate an international technology agreement aligned with SDGs. It should offer preferential access for developing countries to relevant advanced technologies and end discriminatory restrictions. It should also focus on global research and development, on scientific breakthroughs relevant to the 17 SDGs. 7, we should seek an equitable international information technology regime which bridges the divide and enables developing countries to leapfrog into global digital economy of the future. Excellencies, I hope that these proposals for emergency actions and reform will be reflected in the declaration we will adopt at this meeting and will be promoted by our group during the current session of the UN General Assembly. Apart from the cooperation which we desire and expect from the developing countries, the members of the Group of 77 plus China are also well placed to promote their development objectives through mutual South-South cooperation. Several mechanisms for South-South cooperation have been created within the UN system already. We welcome the President of China's Global Development Initiative, a critical component for rapid development. Is connectivity projects that can enhance trade, investments, and economic efficiency. China's Belt and Road Initiative is an outstanding example. Pakistan also looks forward to the completion of the Tapi gas pipeline CASA 1000 electricity grid, the Pakistan-Afghanistan-Uzbekistan railroad, as well as the extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor through Afghanistan. Once Pakistan-India relations are normalized, we can then look forward to the integration of emerging economies of South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. Excellencies, in order to advance our common objectives, Pakistan will convene a ministerial meeting of the Group of 77 in China next December. The conference's action-orientated discussions will assist the group to secure tangible outcomes, especially at the SDC summit to convene at the UN in September 2023 and at the proposed summit of the future in 2024. Excellencies, our countries and peoples confront monumental challenges. We need to change the policies and structures that perpetuate inequality and poverty. We need a positive response from the North to the legitimate objectives and aspirations of the developing world. We will not secure either without mutual support, solidarity and unity. Let this mutual support, solidarity and unity become our guiding principles as we endeavor to build a better and prosperous tomorrow for our peoples. I thank you. Honorable members, excellencies, distinguished delegates, we are pleased that the distinguished President of the General Assembly and the Secretary General of the United Nations are joining us this morning. I am now pleased to invite His Excellency the President of the 77th session of the General Assembly to address the ministerial meeting.
پاکستان کی سربراہی میں G77 ممالک کا اجلاس، اور اس اجلاس سے خطاب کر رہے تھے وزیر خارجہ بلاول بھٹو زرداری. ان کا یہ کہنا ہے کہ ترقی پذیر ممالک کو توانائی کے شعبے میں معاونت کی اشد ضرورت ہے. پاکستان میں سیلاب کی صورتحال کی وجہ سے بڑے پیمانے پر تباہی ہوئی ہے. پاکستان کا 1/3 حصہ پانی میں ڈوبا ہوا ہے. 3 کروڑ 30 لاکھ سے زیادہ افراد